Greetings, humans. Zach here, welcoming you to another book discussion with Sequestered Superlative. Every week we get together and talk about what it is we've been reading the week prior, how we feel about it, and how many times it did or didn't blow our minds. Current book calendar, upcoming reading, book discussion dates, and more can be found at sequesteredsuperlative.com. Enjoy the show. All right, here we go. This is discussion 4 for Abundance by Stephen Coulter and Peter Diamandis, and is the conclusion to our talks about this book. Some of the points we cover are all the different incarnations of incentive prizes, past, present, and future, shifting mindsets to not fear failure and to think exponentially, bodies in Ben Franklin's basement, the Peter Principle, the history of waffles, and potential pitfalls and roadblocks that stem from exponential technology. Join us next week for book discussion 1 on 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos by Jordan Peterson. Okay, cool. So this is the last part of Abundance, section 6. Are either of you reading physical copies? I know, Jonathan, you're not.
I am reading a physical copy.
Jonathan, in the back of the ebook version, can you flip through the pages? Do you have it in text as well, or is it only audio?
I never looked at a real book with words.
Huh. Okay, because there's this whole other section in the back that's just every single page is graphs and data, and then there's
the hub?
No, even further than that. And then behind all the graphs and data, there's a whole other section of the book that talks about all the caveats of exponential technology. I don't know.
Huh.
That's pretty cool.
Oh shit, the appendix.
Yeah, there's the hub, and then there's graphs and data, and then there's another section behind the graphs and data. They go through and talk about a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, no, I see it past the references.
Yeah. The dangers of exponentials.
Jesus, does this book have enough references?
Dude, I mean, the next book we read has almost infinitely more references.
It's just a third of the book is going to be references. This guy said this guy to this guy, quoting this guy, written this time, this page.
The way this starts off is it's basically and this is, I guess, a quote to get started. Until the innovations of abundance bear fruit, scarcity remains a real concern. And nearly as bad as scarcity is the threat of scarcity and the devastating violence it can often incite. That's interesting because when you think of scarcity, you think people dying of hunger and shortages of water, things like that. You don't necessarily think that we're running out of things. I guess it's a pretty small jump to imagine violence coming from scarcity, because usually when you don't have something, you'll get it from someone else. But at scale, it's an interesting thing to think about. There's a link in there about this dude basically goes through and talks about the securitization of climate change and how climate change might be tied to scarcity, which might be tied to increased violence by state actors, as well as industry actors, as well as the bottom people who are actually suffering the scarcity, and kind of projects that out a little bit. I thought that was kind of interesting. But it's good to have that little reminder that until it's here's all these great things in this book, and these are the things that are actually happening, and we've kind of been able to get a little bit of hindsight, as we've gone through this, because this was written, 6 years ago. We can kind of see where it's come to, where it's been since then, and see that actually some of the stuff has played out, and then the influence of bureaucracy and stuff not playing out and that kind of thing. So it's always good to take stock of the potential impediments and things that you have to overcome and be wary for while you're waiting for Techno God. And then they dive right in, and they're basically I thought it was cool because the next thing they do is they go to the heart of, they're we have to take account of the present basically until these things happen. And then it doesn't really skip a beat, and it says, basically lays out how we don't need to wait and what we can do now in order to bring that future closer. Which is kind of probably a good mindset to have, because instead of waiting for things, if you can find shortcuts or things to increase the likelihood and length and decrease the length of time for them to happen, it's probably better than just waiting. But it goes and talks about...
Yeah, I loved the incentivization portion.
Yeah, which is most of this last section is talking about incentive prizes, and it starts off talking about the 4 major motivators for innovation, and mostly people are either curious, afraid, want to get rich, or want to matter, and those are the 4 things that spur motivation. And then it's basically this is how this works, and incentive prizes work really good for all of these things.
Yeah, just as a way to really capture everyone's attention.
Yeah.
To pull everyone in.
I didn't know. There's not very many links, but they're all pretty spot on. There's the XPrizes, which is this guy Peter Diamandis, That's actually his foundation, or at least he was involved in the genesis of some of the first X Prizes. And then I found another thing called Kaggle, Kaggle, and it's basically data science X Prizes, where they're just like, they kind
Huh.
of talked about some of that stuff in the book, but they're just like, I'll read you some of them. Like, given an image, can you find all of the same landmarks in a data set? Label famous and not so famous landmarks and images. Identify and label everyday projects and images. And these are like $2,000 prizes and stuff with 17 teams. There's some bigger ones called like Talking Data Ad Traffic Tracking Fraud Detection Challenge, which is, can you detect fraudulent click traffic for mobile app ads? And that's like a almost $30,000 prize with like 3,000 teams. So you can see like these are things that are
Wow.
happening right now. Like
Yeah.
it's really interesting to see the incentive things. I thought it was cool that he went back and described some of the history of incentive prizes, talking about, for the last like 3 to 500 years or something. This has been, starting back with like traditionally like royalty, putting out, sums of money to accomplish something that they couldn't otherwise have accomplished. Kind of outsourcing the hours and time to invest in it to the general public, and throwing out a net and
No,
getting it back.
it is really fascinating, the historical perspective, and because I would have never thought that people like Napoleon, or I mean, I mean, the back of my head, it's just something I never really had. It's something I'd miss in most history classes. I think in my head is something you'd look over, thinking how these governments are functioning at a different level
Right.
to make research.
Yeah, it's smart.
I kind of felt the whole thing with getting over the ocean, like it was kind of funny, kind of sad.
Oh, the Spirit of
I
St.
don't know.
Louis. Yeah.
I was reading it. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of laughed. Like
Everyone
after the
died,
fourth
and then
person,
someone
I was
didn't
like,
die.
yeah, like had to repress a little chuckle. Like, oh gosh, 33 hours. What was this guy on? My Lord, he wanted that money so bad. I just wonder what his family was like. He's just like, I gotta get out of mom's house. Gotta do it. I got 27 hours into it. He's just like holding on to that idea, gripping. Like, just imagine his fingernails digging into his skin. Like, almost there.
Yeah. Plus, it
This
was
has to be
like
before Adderall.
he like built that shit in his garage. Like that plane was just like a ramshackle ass. Like it was not. He wasn't even like a professional pilot or like aviator or like airplane builder. He just kind of like bought a plane and strapped it all together and took off. Like yeah, that was cool. I think it's the coolest. One of the coolest aspects of like incentive prizes is that there's no bar for entry. To most of them, it's like whoever can do this wins. It's not like whoever can do this with these credentials wins. It's just come do it, and so that casts such a huge net that you get people from completely novice backgrounds to people that have spent their whole life studying these fields, and it's just kind of a toss up to see who will be the one to win the prize, which we've seen through some of the examples he gives, like that one, the Spirit of St. Louis, where that was definitely someone that out of left field came and won it, when there was like other people that were spending tons of money and doing it at a professional level and still couldn't do it. He was talking about leverage, which is like a good thing to have in any situation, whether you're building something or creating a new industry via an incentive challenge, which is another aspect of them. But it's cool
Is
because,
that
go ahead.
is that another? Does that tie into credibility?
Well, he was saying that the credibility thing, what was that called? It's called super credibility, the level of super
Super
credibility.
credibility, not normal credibility. Super.
Dun 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 dun.
No, no.
So yeah, super credibility is where you have basically you have enough big, reputable names tied to your whatever it is, whether it's an incentive prize or the launch of a product or whatever. In this case, he's talking about incentive prizes, and when the example he gives was when he was first trying to fund the initial X Prize. I think it was the Ansari X Prize, for of like with $10 million, and he couldn't do it, nor would anyone sign up to compete in the X Prize or for the X Prize. So what he did is he told a bunch of people, and then that failed for a little bit, and so then he eventually got some. He went to, I think, what did he say? He went to St. Louis, or yeah, St. Louis, and got some like revolutionary thinking people to give him a chunk of change. And so then what he did is hire all like the badass people in the fields he needed from like NASA and like Jet Propulsion Lab and like different places to have them come up and do like a basically a newscast or a convention where he announced it to the world and thereby convinced everyone like instantaneously because he had all these people on stage with him talking about it, endorsing him, that it was legit. And then the money, the rest is history, where the money just came in and competitors signed up overnight, and it was just kind of like that level of super credibility is what's required to spark these things from nothing.
That'd be a great Hollywood movie, right there, like that. The plot that actually just happened.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like he sold the people before he even had the money.
Well, yeah, he did. Yeah.
Like
He spent all the money he ever had on getting people to come on stage. And then
saying that
basically,
he's like, I'm gonna spend all my money saying I'm gonna get the money to help you to do this.
right. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I guess
It's a big jump.
with an incentive prize, you don't have, there's no like clause where you have to have money to do it. It's just like, if you win, you'll get the money. And like whatever happens between now and then, like hopefully the money's there when you win. Well, he did say it took like 10 years or something to actually get the money and for someone to win. So it seemed like it all kind of worked out, but
The balls on that guy, Jesus.
yeah, well,
How does that work once you complete the idea? Do you then own the idea or like the technology and then get to like move forward with it? Or
it wasn't explicit about that, probably for reasons that are, for
Yeah.
good reasons, but I would imagine.
like is it just like common intellectual property at that point?
Yeah,
I wonder how that works.
I would venture to say not, because it's so like monetarily driven. Like, so he does go on to explain in here about how one of the biggest bits of the leverage of a incentive prize is that once the competition is won, you've then created because of the hours and work and R&D that's been put into it, and then the success of the eventual technology, or the birth of the whatever it is, then you get an entire industry. So whoever is involved in that, immediately reaps, orders of magnitudes of benefits from having been involved in it and spending, R&D money to then have an entire industry, probably cornered at the beginning. So
Yeah, that's
But still,
my question.
the question does remain if they actually have the intellectual rights to it.
right. I mean, I would say like
Like, does XPrize get it, or do they get to keep it and they all just also get the prize? It's just interesting.
I
Because
wonder.
presumably, once you succeed, it's almost like you don't even need the prize, because
Right.
you just invented like you just had a breakthrough. So it's strange.
I would say, thinking on like past X prizes that have been won, my general understanding of them has been that the team that creates them it's usually their intellectual property and rights, and I think that if they happen to be partnered with a bigger corporation, so there's probably going to be some clause in that. All of that, the stuff that goes into incentive prizes, I don't know. I think we covered mostly everything. It gives birth to industries. Oh, the actual physiological motivators that tie into, or how incentive prizes tie into the physiological motivators for innovation. Because of the structure and the goals, it increases people's appetite for risk, which drives innovation further. So by their nature, they're doing nothing more than they're nothing more than a focusing mechanism and a list of constraints, which you can see day to day or through experience, or I think sure there's graphs in here that show that people will perform better with certain restraints. There was a thing in here, I don't know if it was in here or somewhere else. I read about yeah, it was in here, this chapter, where they were talking about, instead of thinking outside the box, shop around for the box that works for you, because thinking outside the box, trying to create something out of pure creativity, though possible, is most of the times not the best like physiological route to innovation. But looking for a set of rules and guidelines, a box that fits the path that you're trying to go in is. So that's what they're saying incentive prizes are. Is they're one of the better boxes to put people in, or get people to hop inside of, like cats, to get them to innovate things like hairballs.
One of the things I don't think they went too much into that I find interesting is how do you think of the initial idea that you want people to work on? That seems almost like the most important part, because like you can't try to solve a problem if you don't know that you have the problem.
Right.
Kind of interesting to me.
Right.
Like you sort of have to like envision that there is a solution before you can go try to find it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually something that Ray Kurzweil talks about a lot. I can't remember any specific time or quote that he talked about it, but I know that he does because I've listened to far too much of him. But he does talk about that, where he talks about having to, because he's a self-proclaimed, and other people have assigned him the title of like futurist and like
Yeah.
not prophet, but he definitely has predicted some of the timeline that we're now existing in. Back in the 90s and or 80s and 90s, in regards to the technological innovations we have, and he's invented a shit ton of things, like really like a lot of things that didn't really exist before he invented them. And his thing is basically like, and I think me and you were talking about this the other day, Jonathan, about how it's very hard and nigh impossible for a human brain to like make exponential jumps because of like the linear nature of like day-to-day life. Not to say that it's not possible to train your brain to make those kind of jumps, because it is, massively parallel and probably capable of doing that, but just through the things we've been practicing, the way we've been taught to think, or the way we've just been living life in the world that's mostly linear, we have a lack of, but because of like the kind of like linear nature of the things we live, the way we live, we're not necessarily inclined to think exponentially. But obviously, you can look at people like Kurzweil and you can see that they probably can do that a little bit better than maybe me. I think probably he can do that better than me, and has been able to, and it's like evidenced by his inventions and ways he's predicted things.
Yeah. I mean,
Well,
a
I
lot of
think that
the
it
science
talks about
fiction
that.
stuff.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Like a lot of stuff that's in science fiction, like is written in science fiction first, and then people are like, I wonder if I could actually do that. And then like we have a lot of stuff now that like
Right.
they had in science fiction.
Like it does talk about.
Fuck yeah.
It talks about in here the last chapter we talked about the tricorder XPrize, where the tricorder is the device from Star Trek where they go around and just scan you and it does a whole host of medical analyses on you, and they actually have that, and now they completed the XPrize, and so we have basically a suitcase sized thing, a suite of tools that will give you the same diagnostic capacity as a tricorder. So that's interesting. Yeah, definitely. That's why I'm such a fan. That's one of the reasons I'm such a fan of like sci-fi. Particularly, I'm not a fan of like too fantastical of sci-fi, because I like to see, or at least if it is extremely fantastical, I like to be able to at least draw roots or draw lines back to today, today's technology and stuff, because that's kind of, for me, that's the hallmark of like a good sci-fi, when I can tell that, reasonable extrapolation gives you these technologies from today's stuff. It's not too outlandish to take 500 years, tack it on, and you get this thing from a cell phone, kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's why most sci-fi will have one or two main changes, and then everything else will just be the repercussions of that change.
Right. So that's incentive prizes. Incentive prizes are cool. They're good. That's like one huge, maybe the main way to spur innovation, to bring these abundance producing quote unquote technologies closer to us in the future, closer to our present, and make them more likely. And then it goes on to talk about some of the other areas of life where it just kind of goes to talk. There's like several. It's not really. It's not linear. It doesn't really talk about anything. It talks about several other things in the next section. Where the first thing it talks about is just kind of throws out there that people are going to resist breakthrough ideas until the moment they're accepted as the new norm, which kind of goes back to, I think, the first section where it's talking about the amygdala fear response and cognitive biases, that kind of thing. The basic innate pessimism that's like a survival tool to humans. And then it goes and talks about, from there it kind of goes and talks about failure and in general, in which direction to orient your mindset. We can orient our mindsets to like obviate failure as a negative thing, and maybe turn it into like a positive tool.
Oh yeah, I did like that section. I thought it was really cool. I mean, I don't like failure. Failure is never fun,
Right.
but it was a great section. Thomas Edison's invention of the light bulb took him 1,000 tries to get right.
That guy killed a bunch of
Tesla.
people and put them in the basement. Get out of here.
He was part of the Hellfire Club.
I'm pretty sure, or maybe it was Benjamin Franklin. I think Benjamin Franklin had some like doctor friend who lived in his basement or like lived with him, and or maybe he just
Was
allowed him to use his basement as a lab, and he had like a bunch of cadavers that he came and dissected in his.
they found the bodies down there. I'd heard
Yeah,
about that.
yeah. I don't know why. I just thought of
Well,
it.
you know, that's like medicine. Medicine was a failure at first. They'd just find random bodies. It's a great example to talk about failures that have turned into good things.
Yeah, sure.
With the incentivization that we want to live. It's a pretty big one.
Ooh, talk about an incentive prize. You don't have to die.
It's a good one.
Yeah, for sure. It kind of gives some points. It's kind of brief. I wish there would have been like a whole book on this, but that's probably where our next book is going to come in about failure and which direction to orient your mindset. That's probably going to factor largely in that. But like Elon Musk talks about that a lot. He iterates on failure. Failure is like a part of the daily routine because you fail and then you analyze and you just keep going and build off of that. You iterate on failure in order to build, something that is not prone to fail. And when it does fail, you don't want, that's not a negative thing. You just take it as a lesson. There's a cool, I don't know if it's in this article that I linked, kind of is, but not really. But there's it might have been in the book where it talks about, oh no, I read a ton of articles on this because I got stuck in a failure hole, about how there's kind of like a burgeoning subset of like career coaching and like business coaching and things of that nature, counseling, people that come in and transform businesses that are hired by corporations to come in and restructure or teach things, geared towards this new like quote unquote failure mindset or like failure mindset, where you basically are changing the way you think about failure, taking the fear out of it, turning it into a opportunity to learn rather than like a negative step backwards. I read some stuff about, I can't remember the specific example, but where there was this corporation where they basically did like a top-down, bottom-up thing where they went around and basically taught everyone and got people organized into groups in order to, or they took the groups that the company was organized into and had them in competitions, failure competitions, where like whoever failed the biggest or the worst or the best, I guess I wouldn't say the worst, in like a given month would get a prize, and and the prize was like the biggest opportunity to learn, or like something like that. Which is interesting. They had to implement that across the entire company, and that seemed to improve. I think there were some statistics with it. I don't remember what they were, but it seemed to improve the ability for like some of the different groups to like innovate or keep moving forward beyond failures.
And this is for everyone that didn't want to be part of the trivia team or the like rugby team. They were like, "Fuck it, let's be part of the failure team."
I think it's like April, so I think they plotted this. They started plotting this probably after the failure of the ugly sweatshirt. Ugly sweater thing at Christmas.
It came in
And
naturally.
They were like, all right, that was a failure.
Let's roll with it.
Yeah. The coolest thing, and this is like a paraphrase on my part, but what I got from the last part of the failure section is that becoming an expert is indicative of lessening usefulness and lessening a potential for future innovation. Instead, the mindset should be to seek out the unknown and iterate on failure until competency is achieved, then keep practicing while seeking the next area of exploration and learning. And that was interesting. That was like an interesting little, this is probably a better way to look at things kind of moment that they were putting out there, where it's basically saying that whenever I forget whose law it is, like Herman's law or Joshua's law, someone is, you'll rise to your level of incompetence. And that's used a lot to look at company structure and how to promote people and that kind of thing, which kind of is attached to this, where if you ever see yourself, basically they're saying, if you ever see yourself in a situation where you're at your level of incompetence, or you've started to display quote unquote expertise, where you are, dealing out advice and you're working on basically set way things are, and you're like stayed in the procedures, then that's like indicative of an inability or an unwillingness or a lack of opportunity seizing to engage in new learning and potentially grow as like a person, and as grow your knowledge base as a person and become more valuable. So that's like, potentially a roadblock you can build for yourself or unbuild for yourself. If you then are able to realize that, then you can stopping essentially, and go seek out opportunities for learning, and go seek out people that know things that you don't, situations where you don't know what you're doing, and engage with them, thereby gaining new forms of mastery, or at least competency, and then practicing all those things, but then keep iterating on the diving into the failures so that you keep learning.
Well, I think that ties back into the education section, in an enormous way, and how our education system works. But at the same time, that's like how science works as a principle, is that scientists and people that specify their knowledge, they only become experts by tearing down someone else.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess the last discussion we had, we talked about doctors and how, when they come out of school, they're 50% of what they've learned is pretty much obsolete already. And there's no real telling which half. But then you get these people that go into these careers, start practicing medicine, and they have long careers. And I don't know the statistics. There's probably a significant portion of them that aren't going to go back and go to med school again to learn, another 50% of things that's useful, and another useless 50% of things. So they're just going to, hopefully they try and stay up to date through reading journals and doing research, but an entire 50% of a degree is going to stick with them until their career is over, and be promoting probably, if not wrong, probably outdated things. So we have this whole situation where that's probably mirrored in other industries that aren't based, the application end of it isn't based in an information technology, because that's when it lags behind. Because in medicine, the learning of medical information, as a species, is an information technology, and it is growing exponentially. But the application of it, which is the person who went to school and then practicing medicine, isn't exponential, because they're just a person, not a computer. So there's probably other industries like that, where you get these people who are quote unquote experts, but their expertise is, by its nature, rapidly outdated and potentially harmful, because of that, and probably not as beneficial to themselves or society, because it's not changing in its steadfastness and its immutability.
Well, hopefully they're not so high up that they can't be torn down by someone else that has a different perspective.
Right.
I guess that's what we can really hope for at this current time, is that there's no untouchable people that are spouting false information.
Yeah. Next week we'll talk about despots.
Well, I think most of the time it'll regulate yourself. I mean, if you're holding on to an old idea that doesn't work as well as the new idea should at some point outperform.
Right. Ideally.
In general, I think that's what we would expect to happen.
Right.
I still put cocaine in my soda.
It still works.
Yep.
Wonderful. Yeah. That's great. Me too. I never stopped.
Yay!
We'll cut this part. Don't worry.
That's great. That was so unexpected. My brain just exploded. The adjacent possible, along the long list of first order possibilities that open up whenever a new discovery is made. There's a cool Medium article in here called "What is the adjacent possible?" and there's some yummy soup in it.
You mean like they invented bowls and then they could have a soup?
It's a supracritical soup, a rich minestrone, to be precise.
Who invented the bowl? I feel like I need to thank this
Probably
person.
someone in.
Right. I was thinking about that today. Like, who invented the waffle? Like, first they had to think of a waffle
genius.
iron.
The Danish,
they had
maybe the Dutch.
Yeah. I don't know. They're like, I'm tired of these pancakes.
It makes so much sense.
Yeah.
They were invented by the chef to the Prince Bishop of Liège in the 18th century.
Okay.
All that did was really open up more questions for me personally. Was he Dutch?
He was, in fact,
he also a blacksmith? Like,
Belgian. Guys, Belgian waffles. He was Belgian.
Belgian.
Yeah.
Ah. Which means by default that he was probably a blacksmith and a brewer.
Oh,
Oh.
I hope no one Belgian listens to this because they might have things to say.
Yeah.
Probably multiple languages because they're right in the center of Europe.
Oh man.
Well, I mean, to make like beer, you're practically a scientist, so
Whoa.
interesting.
Yeah. But the adjacent possible is really cool because we have like these inventions that we're going to like incentivize, and by incentivizing them, we open up these entire industries by through each incentive prize. But the adjacent possible is a descriptor for is the things that come into being after that industry comes into being. So when you have this new industry that's
Pizza.
laser nose hair removers, then you might have like an adjacent possible invention that's like laser eyelash trimmers, or something that we can't imagine that's like made possible by the thing that we made possible.
Yeah.
So this is where this kind of ties back into your question, Jonathan, about where do these initial ideas come from? And a lot of the time, I think this probably does a better job of answering it than whatever the heck I said earlier about imagining it. But I think a lot of the time, the answer to that question of where do these initial ideas for the X prizes and incentive prizes come from is probably from previous ones, whether that's a previous X prize or a previous journal, scientific journal or research paper. These things get put out, and then those things shed light on other potentials. The adjacent possible comes more into the realm of discovery or potential discovery, and then those are the things that people probably grasp onto to form further incentive prizes or discoveries.
Yeah.
Little steps towards imagining things.
Yeah. I mean, the adjacent ones tend to be, I think, a little bit more linear. Like you invent something for one thing, and then you're like, what else can I use this thing that we already have for?
Yeah, but then you iterate on that, and then you get an exponential at the end of that iteration or something.
Yeah, you definitely do. The XPrize is interesting for me because it's a little bit different in that you have an idea that you have no idea how to
Oh, you can bring that in.
do it,
I don't
but you think that
paint
maybe
inside.
somebody else will figure it out.
Right.
So just interesting.
I mean,
Because
you're
the
going
first step
inside.
of inventing something is like thinking of the like solution, the problem that it's the solution to.
You're wrong, Jonathan. The first step is believing.
Oh, fair enough.
Or complaining, because I mean, like, if you're not complaining about the problem, then it really doesn't matter to you at all. I mean, you're complacent.
Ooh.
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody was complaining that they didn't have a scanning system that they could just know what was wrong with somebody.
There's totally someone at a grocery store that complained. They were like, "This takes so long to buy this stuff, and the lady has to look in a book. We should just have a scanny-majigger thingy.
Oh,
We can scan our fruits.
The
and
people-
it'll be so good."
The people of Walmart.com are responsible for the tricorder X Prize, FYI.
are they?
Well, apparently they are now. We now know that they are.
All right.
The last little tidbit in here before the chapter's over, or the section's over, is that the freedom to pursue, this is my little summary, the freedom to pursue happiness is attained at about $75,000 a year in America, and as a global average is about $10,000 for average income. And then like to qualify that, like all factors of innovation that engender abundance, dematerialization, demonetization, etc., make this quote unquote freedom ceiling more reachable the more they proliferate.
Yep.
So happiness isn't bought by freedom, but the ability to attain happiness is at your fingertips at about $75,000 here, $10,000 the world over as an average. Shiny technology, techno baubles bring that number down the more they bobble.
Well, I think it's just that it becomes cheaper to eliminate the like hierarchy of needs.
Right.
Stuff. I mean, basically $75,000 is enough to, you don't actually like need anything.
Yeah.
And if you want to go on vacation or whatever, you can, and you don't have to think about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's crazy to think that the global average is only $10,000. Like obviously, that's similar to saying like statistics about crime and stuff, where you have these just like crazy things thrown in there that skew the numbers. But we, still $10,000. To us in America, obviously the differential between 10,000 and 75,000 is quite a bit. But to someone in like large parts of the world, like probably close to half of the world, I would say, the bottom billion's like almost 4 billion, 7 billion people. So like at least half the world, that's a literal fortune to, that they don't even think
people
about.
living on a few dollars a day.
Yeah, right.
I once had this guy from Africa, and he said he had a gold mine, like a legitimate, like owned a gold mine, and he gave me a $2 tip. And then I had to like Google the part of Africa he was from to find out what the $2 like actually was equivalent of, and it was like fucking like $25. And I was like, shit, bro.
You
You
are
ever
the
go to
man.
Africa, you'll be set.
Yeah,
That's what I
exactly.
thought when I saw this. Oh, $10,000 to be happy? I need to move.
Yeah.
I need to go somewhere else. Shit, I'll be like,
Oot.
you have multiple happiness.
Well, I'm happiness times 3. Yeah, so that's the whole thing, and then there's like a bunch of graphs and stuff.
My understanding of the $75,000 number is not that makes it possible to be happy, but anything after that doesn't really make you any happier.
Right, but I don't even think that the happiness is like a direct correlation to the money. It's just like the ability to attain happiness, the freedom, or rather the freedom to attain, to like pursue attaining happiness is accessible, like it's guaranteed accessible at that level because like you said, the hierarchy is met.
And is that like 75? Like you're bringing in 75 a year, or is it like you have 75 in your bank account right now?
Those are yearly incomes.
It's
Okay.
yearly income, and I think what they did initially is they did a bunch of like surveys and stuff, and like rated people's happiness and
Yeah.
rated money, and what they figured out is that on average, people that make 75 are happier than people that make 60, but they're not any happier than people that make like 80 or 100 or a million, or like
No,
you
that
just don't
makes
get anything
sense.
happier from your money after 75,000 a year, because your brain just knows you can do pretty much whatever you want.
Yeah.
You still can have problems and be unhappy and stuff, but like they're not related to money.
Fuck yeah, the pool cleaner sucks. That.
You'll always find something to complain about.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
Little choo-choo train, my water. What the heck?
choo-choo train, my water.
Yeah, they're pool cleaners. They look like choo-choo trains.
Oh.
The robots, yeah, I love those.
So I do kind of want to touch on the appendix real quick. That's the whole of the book itself. The appendix goes over the dangers of the exponentials, talks about, I'll just kind of sum it up, like bioterrorism and how obviously with the increase in technology and the ability to do genetic engineering, etc., it's much, much easier. Not only can we create crazier and more deadly things, but it's much, much easier for anyone to create just like relatively deadly things. As well as the crazier things, like you can go build Ebola in your garage for like relatively cheaply. Like that's an actual thing.
And it is delicious.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna put that right next to all of the uninflated car airbags that I'm gonna be stockpiling on now.
I don't even understand what that means.
It's from the guy who landed or tried to land I think it was like the rover on Mars using airbags.
It definitely worked. That's why that we have like Curiosity is on Mars.
Well, there's other things you can do with airbags that people say you can't do with airbags too. We just don't know about it yet. I'm believing. Stockpiling.
Okay. Cybercrime. Obviously, as technology increases, the point that they make in the cybercrime section in the appendix is that thus far, since the beginning of the internet, since the beginning of computing, modern computing, we haven't had like a standard, a real standard for like software security, software updating, patches, like penetration testing, all these things that go into making good, solid, sound software. We don't really have that. Like we have things that sound like that, but none of them really are that and it's plain to see that that's true because you just look at the news and look at all the hacks and all of the things that come out, like the largest companies in the world, like Intel, largest software or hardware manufacturing companies in the world, like Intel and AMD, have every single one of their processors that they made in the last 10 years has vulnerabilities at the hardware level. Now, the point that they make in this cybercrime part of the appendix is that shouldn't exist. Like we shouldn't have things getting released to the market, to the entire world to purchase that are vulnerable to that have these vulnerabilities. that's just not like that shouldn't exist. We should like obviously there's nothing that's completely waterproof, nothing that's going to be completely proof against cybercrime. But the state of the market is that we just basically release things with tons of holes in them, and that's okay. That's just like how it is. And
Well, it's always going to be easier to make like a box than it is to make a box that nobody else can get into.
Right.
So like you want to make a program and sell it, it's probably going to be harder to make it a safe program than it is a non-safe program.
Right. And their point is that it is a horrible thing that we allowed this market to emerge with that philosophy. Like, obviously, that's not necessarily a philosophy at the beginning. That's just like how it is. It's obviously cheaper not to make things invulnerable. But to say that that's okay and that's how we want to go forward, like, shouldn't, like, obviously, hindsight shouldn't have been how it happened. But, you know, now we should make it through regulation and through like industry partnerships. We should make it so that that stops and things like going forward are relatively invulnerable.
It's like an FDA, but for software.
I guess I think it depends what it is. Like, I guess I think credit card information should be secure.
Yeah, but I mean, so
it is relatively secure based on, you know,
Yeah,
how secure
sure.
they're able to make it. But
yeah, but I mean, I would probably argue strongly against that. But it's not. My opinion is not really what we're talking about. But then they go on to talk about that we work because of our increasing part of the case for increased standards and regulations for computer security and the robustness of software prior to release is that with our increasing integration with technology, where we have all of our information online, we have all of our information not only is it online, it's not like just at our bank, nor is it just on our social media, nor is it's like in 20 different places, probably more, like 20 is probably conservative for each person, the amount of places they have like all of their personal information. And even though some people only type in their like email address and last names, the end user license agreement usually for like most services that you sign up for are going to include something about cookies, and they're going to track you throughout the web, and they're going to learn everything about you. So to say like, oh, they only know my password and name, they know everything about you generally. Like most services do that. They perform that so that they can do anything that's ad based. And I'm not like condemning companies or online services or anything. It's just like a fact of the matter. That's the way a lot of the economy online is driven by ads and not necessarily only by services. So you get these things, and even the things that are driven by services, you know, will harvest this information in order to better serve you. So we're in this place where, and that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just a thing. So you look at this increasing integration with the technology and the amount of places that we are basically in the technology as far as our identities, and the need for security is like overwhelmingly apparent. Like everything needs to be secured. And that's the argument I would make against that, Jonathan, is that we're everywhere, and everything we touch, it basically knows everything about us. Like,
sure.
if we're not there yet, then we will be. And like, you can always make the argument about like, well, if I don't have anything to hide, then it doesn't matter who can see it, blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, like, this identity is you. Someone can be you by acquiring that information, and like, obviously that's probably a bad thing unless you like want them to be you. So the security and things they suggest that it's probably a good thing going forward to implement some stricter forms of like software release, like barriers to software release, etc.
I guess, yeah.
You know, I was listening to recently was this conversation about how there's going to be AIs creating personalities that are going to try to talk to you and befriend you and then try to talk to you and convince you to buy things.
Yeah.
Hey, I mean, if I'm going to be advertised at, I would prefer to be advertised like at effectively.
Smooged, yeah. I mean, that's very effective.
Like, show me stuff that I actually want to buy, not stuff that it doesn't. Like, you know, when I watch TV and there's a birth control ad, like, it really just doesn't do much for me. Hulu's like just has no idea who I am. But
he talks a lot
I
about
guess it depends on what you mean by security. To me, there's a big difference between like, you know, what Facebook is doing and like, you know, getting people's information or whatever, and things like, you know, is this thing hackable?
But what's the difference? I mean, like,
Well, I mean,
if everything already has your information, then the only thing left is it hackable?
Yeah, I suppose.
Isn't Homeboy in Supreme Court right now, actually having that discussion with the Supreme Court?
Yeah, and he's
Like,
like,
right now?
he's like, look at me, bro. It's my company, yo. You can't do anything. I mean, it's really,
I
it's really
wasn't aware of
interesting.
the updates.
It's really interesting to see the dynamic between, I guess, segue to Mark Zuckerberg, but I guess this ties in the dynamic between Mark Zuckerberg and what is it? Is it the Senate or Congress?
Congress.
Congress, yeah. In Congress, where
Everything that they didn't really do anything compared to what Cambridge Analytica did.
sure, but it's. I'm not talking about anything specifically. I'm just talking about the feeling I get from seeing him talking. You know, the bluster. He's kind of blustery and kind of like. And this is. I'm not speaking negatively about it. I probably have some opinions on it, but I don't know that they matter.
Will they be scored by Trent Reznor? That's the real question.
my opinions on it?
Yeah.
No,
Yes,
the Senate.
Please.
I am for that. Thanks for listening. It's been a blast. To get engaged, head over to sequesteredsuperlative.com and subscribe with your email to get all the latest updates, including new book discussion audio, blog posts, and more. So long until next time.